Hello, happy Friday to all of you ladybugs and yellow jackets out there. I almost transposed that in my head to be like lady jackets and yellow bugs, but uh, which I guess yellow bugs are a kind of a thing. So welcome to Author Reads here on Friday. I'm sorry that I missed you guys last week, but we are back. I am your host, Fairy Princess Lolly, and today I'm here with author Jack Sutter. So before we get started, Jack, you can wave before I start asking you all of the questions. Though I just want to ask our viewers at home, please hit the like and subscribe button, if you will. And if you have comments and feedback as things go on, please, I can see your comments. I love to have that feedback, and we like to converse with the audience. So, Jack Sutter, you write high urban and historical fantasy. I'm very proud of myself for memorizing that.
It's a bit of I write in what you might call an everything but the kitchen sink universe. I cross a lot of different genres and styles with my writing, and I made the dubious decision early on to try to put it all together in one cohesive universe, which is interesting. It's a lot of fun, but it's a challenge.
And so it's a world of your own making that we are in here, is, as I understand it. Yeah, okay. Tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, where are you from? What do you do? Is writing your full-time job, et cetera, et cetera?
Oh gosh, well, I live in Texas. I'm not originally from here. Lived in Seattle for quite a number of years. I was in California before that. So, but I've been in Texas for a little over 20 years now. So it's my home at this point.
That's where I on the Leprechaun lived for many, many, many years. I'm not sure. You probably have no idea who I'm talking about, but he's one of our regular co-hosts on the Fae News on Wednesday nights. So is writing your full-time job then, or is it your hobby?
I would like to make it my full-time job, but it has been my full-time job a couple of different times. But right now it kind of is, because I'm caught up in the whole COVID wave type thing. Which is both exciting, enjoyable, and terrifying.
Yeah, right, all at the same time. So I'm really excited actually to take a look at some of your stuff, because all of your writing, as I understand it, is completely on the interwebs. You don't have actual published books. And of all the authors that we have had on the show so far, you have quite a unique way of having everything out there. And so when you're done reading your excerpt for us, I'm actually excited to let's go take a look at some of your websites together. And it's cool. I was looking at it actually way back when you wanted to, signed up to come on the show, and then I was looking at it again today, and I really just like how you have all of your world stuff sort of laid out there. But I'm curious, why have you gone this route as opposed to other more traditional routes?
Part of it is I really value and really am fascinated by the concept of the independent content creator. I watch a lot of YouTube channels. I've been involved in podcasts, and that world just really appeals to me. The ability for content creators to directly interface with the audiences, to just build to build their communities and their audiences. And it's also, this may be, my own thought processes, but to me, the world of literature is in a state of flux right now. We have the availability of so many online platforms that we didn't have before, that the rules, if you will, are changing. And early on, I thought to myself, I could spend years going around to publishers hat in hand with a manuscript, or I could just go on the website and build my audience straight from there. It worked for The Martian. It could work for me.
Yeah, definitely. Did the Martian really start that way?
Mm-hmm.
That's a great story.
On the guy who wrote it, I don't remember his name. I'm not good with names. He took his work to publishers for many, many, many years, never got anywhere, and finally started writing The Martian as a serial on his website, and he got followers. Apparently, some NASA scientists started following his work and were like, "Oh, that's really cool, but you need to tweak this here and there." And that's actually more the way.
That's awesome.
Out.
And
And
then he got Matt Damon to play in a movie. So that's cool. Well, yeah, that is definitely also one of the things that I really like and about. So you've created this whole world, and can you tell us a little bit about it before the concept of the world that we're going to be listening to an excerpt from with your writing? Can you just elaborate on what that setup looks like?
well, this may be a little bit of the man behind the curtain, but I tend to think of it as an engineered universe.
Okay.
And by that I mean,
By that you mean
it's a universe that is designed to perform a function.
okay.
And when I was in my early teens, I started getting the idea that I wanted to write fantasy. And I had all these ideas for places, kingdoms, people, but I had no world to put it all in. So I was like, okay, where do I put this? Where do I set all this? And so I started with building a world that would serve as a vehicle for storytelling.
Okay, that makes perfect sense.
And I was thinking to myself, well, what kind of stories do I want to tell? Well, I want to write stories about knights. I want to write stories about maybe ancient mythological gods. I want to write stories about pirates. I want to do everything, actually, is what I realized. And I also, at the same time, I'm a history geek. I like history, and I really value historical integrity, if you will. And one of the transformative moments in my life, I was always a big Sherlock Holmes fan. I read all of the stories when I was a kid. And yes, and eventually I was starting to get into medieval history. And I read Sir Arthur Conan Doyle's The White Company. And I was like, oh, this is amazing. It's Arthur Conan Doyle and it's the Middle Ages. What could go wrong? And I never finished the book. It really just drove me crazy because although it is set in the mid 14th century, all the characters are so Victorian. They just think like Victorians. They talk like Victorians, everything. And it just really, really annoyed me. And I realized that, for one thing, writing historical fiction that's actually true to history is incredibly hard. To get into
I was just gonna, that is the question I was lining up in my head.
Yeah.
It's like so I won't even ask, just keep going.
The mindset of people from 500 years ago is just, they can think so differently from us on so many things. Their values are different. Their experiences are so different. How do I get into the mind of someone like that? And my other challenge is that if I wanted to write historical fiction, this may be a bit too much of the, I don't know, perfectionist, whatever, but I would feel that I really wanted to be an expert on a particular genre. Oh gosh, what was the gentleman's name who wrote the Captain Jack Aubrey books, which is, British Navy, Napoleonic Wars, the movie Master and Commander is based on his work.
I know who you're talking about, but I too actually I often forget the names of authors and much more remember the content of their work. So, which maybe that's terrible of me. I have not forgot your name yet, though. Yeah, I totally remember your name, James. Jack. No. So speaking of historical fiction and high fantasy. Now, so your writing here involves, elves and fae and other such creatures like that, like in a parallel dimension, sort of. Okay, so I'm curious, how do you determine what you think is accurate historical fairy lore versus not not real, I guess. Because arguably somebody could say that, well, all of it is real since none of it is real, or since none of it is real, all of it is real. So how do you determine what you think is more authentic versus less authentic? What are your criteria for that?
It's difficult to say. For me, if I'm reading, say, a piece of historical fiction or something that is closely based on folklore or mythology, there are there are red flags, if you will, for inauthenticity. When you see something that's like, okay, this person expressed this idea that I don't know, there should be like universal voting rights or something. It's kind of like that's a very modern thought. That's a good thought. I agree with you, but that's not how this person would have thought. That's not how um, people were really thinking in those days, or if they did, they might not say it out loud. Uh, Other things where turns of phrase, expressions, or and of course there are things that I also am just more familiar with, where you say, "Oh yes, a Knight Templar walks in wearing a green robe," and it's like, no, the Knight Templars did not wear green. You just it's factual.
Okay, well, what is it that you have brought to read for us today that you're going to read from?
Well, I have written two complete novels. I have several that are on the rotisserie, and one of my novels I have been releasing as a serial on my website, along with several short stories. However, I recently published a piece that is actually intended to be a serial. It's intended to be an ongoing thing, sort of like a TV show or serial fictions way back in the day. And I'm very excited about it. And when I talk to people in preparation for this, I was like, okay, should we read this one or that one? They're all saying you should read the serial because it's our favorite. So I was like, okay, I'll read that.
All
And
right then. Well, I will turn the camera over to you so you'll have the full screen here. I will put myself on mute, but I will be in the background listening and also in the comments taking questions from viewers and just interacting with the audience, etc. as you read. So, and if something for some reason you need me to pop back in, if an emergency happens or whatever, just say something because I'm right here listening. You just can't see me. Talk about man behind the curtain. All right, here we go. Oops, full screen on the wrong person.
okay, so the title of this serial is Journeys in the Fate World. Journeys in the Fair World, Gate Marshal. Beyond the pale thresholds of this earth, beyond the fury and roar of human splendor and human folly, there lies another realm. An entire body of worlds, occupying the same place in the universe as our own, yet entirely removed from ours and whole unto themselves. Some of them are only just around the corner, waiting to be discovered where they lay hidden deep within the mists of mundanity, while others hurtle invisibly above us through the trackless stars. Between these worlds, there lies the dark fog of the astral planes, where demons and feral spirits lurk in the shadows of existence. From the abyssal dungeons of the underworld to the farthest dimensions of the universe, there are countless powers unfathomable to man, powers which, if unleashed, would lay waste to creation. Seeping through the cracks of reality is an endless stream of untamed magic, wearing down the walls which separate worlds and piercing them with fissures. Standing firm against these chaotic tides are the good folk, the crafters and stewards of creation, who constantly build and rebuild who constantly rebuild and fortify the gateways between worlds. And manning the gates are those servants of the good folk who are their chosen soldiers from the ranks of man, those born of earth who pledge their lives to the defense of their world and its people, those who are called gate marshals. Chapter 1: The White Stag. The sky rolled down to meet the horizon like a billowing, seamless curtain on the great stage of the universe. Beneath it lay the spreading plains of a prehistoric seabed, rolling away in all directions as far as could be seen until it faded into the horizon and became one with the sky. Long ago, the entire land had been submerged beneath the waves of a primordial sea, which had once engulfed a third of North America and clove the continent in two from north to south. But now the blue waters of the sea were long gone, and in their place was instead a sea of brown grass, speckled with scrubby green trees and broken up into little geometric blocks, fenced off with long strands of barbed wire placed by the curious species of animal which now lived there. And dividing the land in two from north to south was the great Interstate 35 highway, a tiny filament of asphalt laid out on the face of the earth, threading its way through the heart of the United States. A few miles away from the highway, at a place in the Texas countryside, about halfway between the Oklahoma border and the outer fringes of the Dallas-Fort Worth metropolitan complex, was a gravel road. Here the persistent, gentle roar of the ceaseless stream of traffic along the great highway had long since faded away. The docile rush of cars in the wind was replaced by the feral rush of the wind in the trees, and on the road was but a single car. It was an older car, a Ford Explorer, its green paint chipped and faded here and there, the faux leather upholstery worn thin and torn, and the controls clunky and sticky. The driver was a man of medium height, about 30 years of age. His eyes were of a steely gray color, and his deep, auburn-colored hair was tied back in a long ponytail, and on his face he sported a closely carved goatee which neatly outlined his lower jaw. He wore an olive-green commando sweater over a pair of cargo pants in a speckled German camouflage pattern, and on his feet were a pair of red-brown equestrian boots. Slung over his left shoulder was a leather satchel, while on his right hip there rode an old Heckler & Koch P7N13 pistol, the fine walnut grips dinged and dented with age, and the dark finish of the metal tinged with deep purple patina. The breeze had picked up slightly, and the sky was beginning to darken. It was the middle of the afternoon, and a moment ago the sky had been cloudless. But all of a sudden the world had become dimmer. The driver slowed to a stop and peered out the window beside him. The wind was picking up strongly now, and the treetops were beginning to quiver and shake in the untamed breeze. And beyond the treetops you could see dark columns of clouds hurtling through the sky like fleeing ghosts, where before there had been naught but clear skies. The plants, too, were suddenly different. The driver wasn't much of a botanist, but it was plain to him that even the trees and the plants around him had shifted. To either side of the road there was now a dense tangle of plants not native to this part of the world. Taking a deep breath, the driver reached under the seat next to him and pulled out a compact rifle, a short-barreled Ruger AC-556, with faded wood furniture and a folded metal stock. The driver slipped his finger into the trigger guard for a moment and flicked off the safety, and then set the weapon down on the front seat beside him, well within easy reach. For somewhere along the gravel road he had just left Texas behind. You can see I'm not used to reading out loud. The driver returned his hands to the wheel and released the brakes, and the car began to creep down the road again, a bit more slowly this time. Up ahead was a bend in the road, and the path was obscured by trees. The car cautiously made its way around the corner, only to jerk to an abrupt stop again as the driver slammed the brakes. For there, standing in the middle of the road, was a great white stag. It was a majestic creature, the sheen of its fur spotless and immaculate save for a few patches of ash gray about its throat and tail. It fairly glowed where it stood, and indeed there was a certain radiance to it which seemed not entirely natural as it stood motionless in the road, blocking the way. The wind had suddenly fallen still, and silence was in the air. The driver stared warily over the wheel at the stag, and the stag merely stared back. Gingerly, the driver put his vehicle in park and opened the door. The stag's ears twitched slightly as the stillness was broken by the sound of the car door, but otherwise it remained motionless. The driver reached over to retrieve the rifle beside him, and then gingerly stepped out of his vehicle, cautiously switching the firing mode to full auto as he took a few steps closer to the stag. The creature was large, and as the driver approached, the size of the animal seemed almost to magnify, as a faint golden glow began to emanate from the fringes of his fur and the sharp tips of his great antlers. And then the animal spoke. "Seamus Donovan!" The creature's voice was deep, and it resonated weirdly through the trees, echoing as though it had been spoken in some great hall of ancient stone rather than a forest. Heed my words, Seamus Donovan. The hour of the spider is approaching. The claws of Rekaul are open, and the eyes of Athesha are closed. Beware, Seamus Donovan, for the spider's eye rests upon the Harrowmath. And then the creature vanished. It was as if a great dark passageway lined with trees had opened up behind it, and the stag turned around and walked away, fading into the distance almost immediately as the tunnel of trees itself faded in turn, leaving behind only the woodland road. The driver took a deep breath, taking his finger away from the trigger of his weapon as he did so. The wind was beginning to pick up again, and the unnatural silence had been replaced by the gentle rustle of the trees and foliage. Tearing his eyes away from the spot where the stag had vanished, the driver walked back to his car. Reaching inside, he plucked out a small handheld radio and flicked it on. Manticore 31 to Father. The radio crackled to life as a voice responded in turn. Manticore 31, this is Father. Go ahead. Incident confirmed. Contact made. Large ungulate, male, color white. Verbal communication. Contact has withdrawn through a fissure object. Understood, Manticore 31. Withdraw to grid 43971 Mike and await further instructions. The driver acknowledged and climbed back into the car, shivering a bit as he did so. Not all contacts were hostile, but all incidents were dangerous. As the driver got back into the seat and shifted to reverse, he felt a sudden sense of unease. A sort of looming dread, cultivated by years of experience doing his job. There, in the brush just ahead, slightly to the right of his vehicle. A moment ago he thought he'd seen the bushes move, and not because of the wind. The driver felt a sudden surge of adrenaline, and grabbing his rifle he rested the stock on his dashboard and aimed the muzzle into the bushes. And then, all hell broke loose as the glass in front of him suddenly exploded. The windshield of his car burst into pieces as from the bushes came a barrage of automatic gunfire, peppering the front of his vehicle with bullets. The driver returned fire immediately, bracing his weapon against the dashboard with one hand and dumping almost an entire magazine into the woods in front of him as he grabbed for the radio with his other hand. Manticore 31, code red, shots fired, repeat, shots fired. The driver emptied the rest of his magazine as he unleashed another round of suppressive fire into the woods, and then hurled himself out the door. The shooters in the woods returned fire in kind, perforating the car with another round of bullets, as the driver crouched behind the rear wheel and pulled a fresh magazine from his satchel. Suddenly, from another part of the woods close to the rear of the car, was another short burst of gunfire. And then the gunman himself stepped out of the woods. The gunman was a small creature, a little over 4 feet tall, with long, pointed ears and mottled, unwholesome-looking skin, grown over everywhere with funguses, and in its hands it clutched a crude-looking submachine gun. Seeing the driver, the creature unleashed a burst of automatic fire in his general direction, but he was plainly inexperienced with his weapon, and most of the bullets ended up in the treetops as the muzzle of his firearm climbed uncontrollably. A fresh magazine now in his rifle, the driver returned fire with 2 quick bursts, and the creature collapsed motionless to the ground. Faintly, the driver could hear a voice talking over the radio in the car behind him, but the noise was drowned out by another burst of fire from the woods at the front of his car. The driver unfolded his rifle stock and peeked cautiously around the right corner of his vehicle. There in the woods was another one of the creatures, looking out from the trees trying to spot his victim. With another burst from his rifle, the driver dropped the second creature in turn. The woods exploded with more gunfire, but the newly deceased creature had given his comrade's position away. The driver reached into his satchel and pulled out an old fragmentation grenade. In a moment, he had pulled out the pin, and then with a grunt, he threw the explosive over his car and into the woods where the second creature had fallen. The driver's eardrums were nearly shattered by the explosion that followed. And then the woods were still. And there you have it.
Well, now I'm like the invisible voice. Here I am. That was great. I really like your reading voice. So
that credit goes to my mother. I just am imitating her.
But I mean, like the actual sound quality of your voice is also quite good and soothing. So anyway, just a compliment.
Well,
so we did have a question while you were reading, but before I get to the list of questions, Did you want to read another excerpt from another one of the types of your writing, or did you want to just move on?
I'd be delighted to read another excerpt.
Okay, well, I would love to have you do so. I kind of want to. I do have one question that I want to ask real quick. So that was from um that 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 bit was from one of the novels. No, that is your
Mhm.
serial that you've written. But what are the Annals of Algard? That's another thing that's on your website, and they have the same looking cover. So are they
Mhm.
related?
Yes. All of my writing thus far, I'm actually, while I'm speaking, I'm pulling up another story, which I didn't have the foresight to print out. All of my writing thus far is all set in the same universe, and as such, the covers that I have pulled together are all similar in design.
Okay,
Uh, the Annals of Algard is an umbrella term that I use for my short stories, rather than, for instance, in just in designing my website, rather than having links to a zillion stories, they're all under one umbrella. So
gotcha.
basically, the Annals of Algard, each one, they're all set in the same universe, but they all are independent, standalone stories.
Okay, that makes perfect sense. Well, I'll turn it over to you again then, and just remind anybody listening out there in the audience, if you guys have questions that you want to ask for when he is done reading, just type them into the comments, and I will take them down, and we'll ask when the excerpt is done.
All right, so this is a short story I wrote a while back, and I'm glad to have the opportunity to read this because this is it's in the same universe, but it's in a different, very different place, and it gives you a good look at the diversity that I have here. So this story is called The Trufflers. In the fair world, nestled in the heart of the continent of Eptamar, there lie the noble kingdoms of the Elfkin, the sons and daughters of the fairy folk. Perhaps the littlest and least among these was Essenet. There were no great cities in Essenet, no mighty fortresses or great citadels. It was a peaceful land, a quiet and serene corner of the world, resting under the protection of a mighty elven king who was conveniently far away. It was June, and the air was warm and humid, hanging over the world in a mildly oppressive manner like a damp curtain. The sky was clear and bright, and beneath it there lay a land of gently rolling hills covered in spongy green treetops and small patches of fields, enclosed by rows of poplars. Piercing through the treetops was a lone tower of brown stone. At its top was a spindly slate spire, beneath which were 4 sets of double-arched windows looking out to the east, west, north, and south, watching serenely on all 4 points of the compass. It was a bell tower, and a bright light shone in the windows as the afternoon sun was reflected on the polished surface of a set of bronze bells. Not far from the tower, the tree line dipped into a shallow crease in the land, where a stream ambled its way through the countryside, babbling its little woes and troubles to itself as the water tumbled over smooth cobbles and around twisted roots. Standing in the stream was an elven girl. Her eyes were bright green, her ears were short and pointed, her hair was long and chestnut-colored, and her name was Anin. She was stripped to the waist, and her underskirt was hiked up and tucked into a thin leather belt. Even so, she was still managed to get her clothes quite wet as she wandered deeper into the stream, her face focused and intent as her eyes probed the shallow depths of the water. There, yes, there it was. Anin stooped over, pausing briefly to brush a few strands of her hair out of the way, and reaching into the cool water, she extracted an odd, funnel-shaped basket from the bed of the stream. It was a crayfish trap, and as Anin held up the basket in the sunlight and peered inside, she could see that there were 3 of the brown-colored crustaceans inside. That made 8 for today, enough to make a good supper for old Gopil, the bell-keeper. Suddenly, Anin gave a start, as from the direction of the bell tower there came a sharp, unpleasant ringing sound which reverberated piercingly through the treetops. The noise was not from one of the great bronze bells, for theirs was a deep and melodious voice, but came rather from an old iron ring with a voice like a steel cockerel, which the bell-keeper used to summon his assistants. With a squeak, Anin turned around and splashed her way back to the bank. Fumbling for a moment with the basket, she shook out its contents and then dumped the crayfish into a clay jar. She then grabbed her shoes and a bundle of her belongings and began to run towards the tower, only to turn around again almost immediately to return to put the lid on the jar. I haven't practiced this one. She then turned back again and ran through the woods, her one free arm trailing to her side and her hair streaming behind her as the air was filled with another loud chorus ringing from the tower. In a few moments she had reached the tower. It was surrounded by a small clearing which contained not only the tower, but also a cottage with a fenced garden and a few outbuildings. Without pausing, Anin ran to the tower and clambered up several flights of stairs until she reached a large, bare room, where 8 silken ropes dangled from the very top of the tower through a set of square holes in the ceiling. It was hot and stuffy in the room already, and in a few moments it would be even hotter and stuffier. There was a thumping sound from the wooden stairwell, and through the door old Gopil himself came at last. The bellkeeper was a wiry old elf man with long, unkempt white hair and an equally long and unkempt beard. He was shirtless and barefoot, dressed in a long saffron-colored half-gown, which was already half soaked with sweat. Without speaking, the bellkeeper and his assistant threw themselves onto the ropes, heaving and panting as they jumped back and forth rhythmically between each cable, while high above them the bells began to ring with a gentle authority, filling the woods with a simple melody in a characteristically elven mode. 10 times each day the bells were rung, marking each of the 7 magic hours of the day, and the 3 magic hours of the night. The song of the bells rang out through the forest, passing over the treetops and down into the chimneys and windows of many small workshops which were scattered throughout the surrounding woodlands, wherein keen elven artificers crafted all manner of magical potions and remedies. There were certain potions which could only be brewed at certain mystical hours, and the elven craftsmen depended upon the great bell and its keeper to announce the commencement of each hour. It was simple magic, the kind which is most needed to ordinary folk, treatment for boring ailments and elixirs for the softening of common troubles. These were sold to foreign merchants who came regularly to Essenet, who in turn resold them again to other traveling merchants and peddlers, who carried them to faraway lands to people who had never heard of a land called Essenet. In a few minutes, the song of the bell was over. Across the woodlands, the elven brewers were settling down at their tables and benches to begin their next round of labor for the day, while back at the tower the old bellkeeper and his assistant had just finished theirs. Anin leaned back against the nearest wall with a sigh, the last echoes of the bells still ringing in her ears. Ringing the bells was laborious, and there was a reason why old Gopil needed someone to help him, particularly in the summer. Anin's body was dripping with sweat in the humid air, and her hair was wet and sticking to her skin. She was thankful that this was the last time she had to ring the bells today, and she was looking forward to returning to the stream and throwing her sticky self into it. The old bellkeeper paused for a moment, listening to the silence. Then, without a word, he turned and descended the stairs from whence he came. Anin gathered her things and followed him down to a room on the first floor of the tower. Gopil went straight to a cupboard and retrieved a great jug of water, which he poured out into a pair of voluminous wooden tankards for himself and his assistant. After taking a few deep draughts, the old man took a cloth and, soaking it with water, began to lade his rickety limbs. The old elf was every bit as sweaty as Anin, and significantly smellier. Anin sighed, waiting for her dismissal as Gopil carried on without speaking, and then began to putter about the room. Finally, Anin cleared her throat. "Eh?" said Gopil as he looked up from whatever he was doing. "Something the matter, Anin?" "Yes, if you don't mind. I thought I might go back to the stream and see if I can catch a few more crayfish." "No need, my girl. You're free to leave for today. Seval will be here soon enough to help for the evening watch, and he said that Atalf would be bringing me some fresh game for supper." At this, Anin drew a sharp breath as her heart quickened just a little bit. "Atalf is coming?" "Oh yes, I'm sure they'll be here any minute now. I hope they're bringing a nice breast of pheasant. I love a good pheasant. A nice breast of pheasant would be a welcome change from crayfish. Did you know that I once ate nothing but crayfish for an entire year?" Gopil went on talking, but Anin had stopped listening. It had been several days since she'd last seen Atalf, and the last time had been but briefly. The cool water of the stream could wait. She pretended to listen as Gopil kept talking and began collecting her things. Hastily she donned an amber-colored overshirt, and even as the layer beneath it was still wet, and throwing on a cropped... Ah, I haven't practiced this one. Hastily she donned an amber-colored overskirt, even as the layer beneath it was still wet, and throwing on a cropped leather bodice, she quickly began lacing it up. Gopal was still talking as she pulled on her shoes and at last excused herself. Annin bolted outside and made her way to a tree which stood near the narrow dirt road which led to the bell tower. And there she waited, idle and anxious, watching the road eagerly. She was still tired and sweaty, and the cool waters of the nearby stream beckoned to her, but she ignored its call and remained stationed beneath her tree like a sentinel at his post, waiting. Just waiting. She waited for what seemed like an eon, and then, all of a sudden, there came through the forest the voices of young men talking gaily, and in a moment the object of her long vigil at last rounded into sight. Aetolf was a wiry sort of elf, muscular and lean of build, with long blonde hair which draped silkily over his shoulders. He wore a tight-fitting, sleeveless brown leather jerkin which left his sinewy arms bare, and a pair of tall, laced-up boots which went well past his knees. In one hand he carried a dead pheasant strung on a cord like a fish on a line, while at his side was a voluminous leather bag full of all manner of exotic plants, strange herbs, and rare fungal fruits. On his back he carried a bow and a quiver, and strapped to his waist he bore a large wood knife, the ancient tool and sidearm of the wood elves. For Aetolf was a truffler. As any young person in Essenet would attest, being a truffler was by far the most illustrious and romantic occupation one could have. The Elfkin have a long history of living in the woods and forests, which was no less true in Essenet. For the elixirs brewed by the elves of Essenet required all manner of weird and wondrous ingredients which the surrounding woodlands had in abundance. But someone had to go out into the woods and find all these queer things, and that someone was a truffler. The trufflers spent their days rooting around the forest floor in search of special herbs or valuable mushrooms, laying traps for small exotic creatures, or hurtling through the woods in pursuit of them. The trufflers had a reputation as a carefree and autonomous lot, roaming the woodlands as they did and being left largely to their own devices. No bells or magic hours governed the course of their days. Likewise, too, the trufflers were seen as brave and adventurous, for the woods were full of wild and untamed magic, and many equally wild and untamed creatures. Walking beside Aetolf was Sebal, a young elf man dressed in a long green gown, who could very well have passed as a younger version of old Gopal the Bellkeeper, and indeed it was thought that Sebal would ultimately assume the role when Gopal would at last quit his post. Sebal was a nice fellow, and Annin liked him, but her eyes were only for Aetolf. Her breath quickened as she felt a sort of painful thrill at the sight of him. She tried to smile, and her hand jerked up and sort of twitched with a spasm that was supposed to have been a friendly wave. Her heart nearly leapt as Aetol looked back at her and replied with a big wave of his own and a confident grin. But he continued on without speaking, and her heart immediately sank back down to a place lower than where it had started. As Aetolf and Sebal disappeared inside the bell tower, Annin leaned back against the tree again. Her shoulders drooped, and amidst the hot, humid air of the woods she absently wrapped her arms around herself as if she were shivering against a sorrowful chill that was only inside her. For Aetolf seemed never to notice her. Any disinterested male would have said Aetolf must be blind, for whether she knew it or not, Annin was very much an attractive girl, being in possession of both a handsome body and a gentle disposition. But sadly, as is so often the case, that which is most pleasant and familiar is often that which is most overlooked, and what Annin had by way of both person and personality, she lacked by way of spectacle. She stood there for a while, her eyes drifting back and forth between the ground at her feet and the doorway through which the object of her thoughts had disappeared. She could have gone anywhere else. The remainder of the day was hers, and there were all manner of pleasant ways with which she could occupy it. But she remained rooted where she stood, like a handmaid waiting on fate. She was staring blankly at the doorway when suddenly a small miracle occurred. The door opened, and Aetol stepped out. And then, in a greater miracle still, he began to walk towards her. A weird thing about caring for someone is that it often makes people feel extraordinarily timid. As Aetolf closed in on her with a casual stride, and Annin found herself backing into the tree, almost wishing it would absorb her. A few feet away, Adolf stopped and grinned. "Hello, Anin. Fancy a walk into the woods?" Anin gulped. "Hello, Adolf," she stammered. "I'd love to." "Splendid!" Adolf cried. "I thought you might. Ever seen a glimmerfly, Anin?" "No." "Well, with any luck, you'll see one today. Gellin and I were mucking about in the west thicket yesterday, and we found fresh glimmerfly spores all over the place. There's bound to be one, and today we're going to find it. It'll be fun. Nobody's seen a real glimmerfly in ages, and when we bring one back, we'll be the toast of the forest." The pair of them headed off again down the road into the forest, talking as they went. Or rather, Adolf did most of the talking, and Anin did most of the listening. But it was all right. Adolf had all manner of interesting stories to tell. He talked of traps and snares, the best way to find buried truffles, how to tell an enchanted mushroom from a poisonous one, feral pixies which looked like twigs, and giant insects which looked like trees, and rumors about a white stag which had been seen somewhere in the woods. As they walked, little shafts of sunlight peeped through the treetops and bathed Anin's skin with a gentle warmth, much like the warmth that was now building up inside her. Listening to Adolf felt good, and his attention made her feel special. True, he probably talked that way to everybody, but somehow she couldn't help but hope that for her it might be different. It wasn't very long before they left the forest road, taking instead a narrow truffler's path which led deeper into the woods. They took many twists and turns, sometimes leaving the path entirely and crossing over a small patch of undergrowth to reach another. And after a while they came to a path which led to a small clearing. Standing in the clearing was a tall elf man, accompanied by a medium-sized dog. The man was a bit taller than Adolf, and cut an imposing figure as he leaned on a great gleaming spear, while at his side he wore a massive wood knife that was practically a small sword in its own right. Anin had never particularly liked Gellin. He was always courteous and considerate, but equally he was always cold and aloof, and always seemed to be brooding about something. The exact opposite was true of his dog, Starsides. Starsides was a beautiful, lithe creature with a silvery gray cloak, a body like a greyhound, and a face like a slender wolf. She was a friendly and gentle animal, and she immediately bounded up to Anin with bright amber eyes and tried to give her a kiss with a slobbery tongue. Anin avoided the kiss as best she could, and squatting down she began to say silly and friendly things to the silly and friendly creature as she fluffed and fondled her furry neck. Up to now, Gellin had said nothing. He merely frowned at Anin for a moment as she played with Starsides. Then he turned to Adolf. "What did you bring her for?" he demanded. Adolf shrugged in reply. "Anin's never seen a glimmerfly. It'll be all right. Glimmerflies aren't dangerous. Well, not especially dangerous." "It wasn't the glimmerfly I was thinking of. The place we're going to was also teeming with unicle tracks yesterday." "It'll be all right," Anin said, standing up as she did so. "I go into the woods a lot. I'm sure I'll be fine." "Not these woods, I'll warrant." "It will be fine," Adolf interjected. "Both of us will be with her, and we've got the dog with us as well. We didn't see any unicles at all yesterday. No doubt we shan't see any today either." Gellin clearly wasn't happy, but he said nothing more on the subject. With the dog rooting around ahead, the three elves at last quit the path entirely and headed off into the woods. They had been going for some time when all at once Gellin stopped abruptly and peered into the underbrush. Anin crept up behind him and peeped around his body to see what he was looking at. It was a little patch of bare dirt on the ground, in which there was the impression of a fair-sized cloven hoof and a fresh pile of green-colored feces. Starsides, the dog, took a little sniff at the noxious stuff and then growled slightly. Gellin turned to Adolf. "You and Anin go ahead. Starsides and I will catch up with you later." "Surely you don't want to miss out on catching a glimmerfly," Adolf replied. "If you find a glimmerfly, then don't hesitate to catch it. If you find anything else, be careful." With that, the elves parted ways, Gellin and Starsides remaining where they were, while Adolf and Anin pressed on ahead. They had come to a particularly dark place in the wood. The foliage was thick, and a little sunlight came through, leaving the forest floor to remain in perpetual twilight. Everywhere the trees were grown over with clinging vines and weird fungi, some of which almost appeared to glow with a light of their own. And then suddenly, there it was. the glimmerfly. It was drifting on the breeze with the lightness of a jellyfish, its iridescent wings glowing with a faint blue light, while long tendrils terminating in luminous yellow orbs trailed in its wake. At the sight of the glimmerfly, a change suddenly came over Adolf. It was as though he had fallen into a trance. The girl beside him was forgotten, as were the woods and trees all around him. His eyes were fixed on the glimmerfly, and he saw naught else. With a soft, cat-like motion, the elf plucked an arrow from his quiver, and knocking it into his bowstring, he took careful aim at the ethereal creature. For a moment he hesitated, watching the glimmerfly with an unblinking eye as it floated gently on the breeze. As Anin watched, her heart was beating so hard that she felt it might burst. Thwack! In a sudden flash, Adolf drew back the bowstring and released his arrow. But the instant the missile came hurtling at it, the gentle glimmerfly abruptly twitched and rolled out of the way at the last moment, and the arrow shot past and embedded itself in a tree. Then, beating its wing furiously, the glimmerfly shot away through the trees at a speed which seemed almost uncanny. With a curse, Adolf sprung forward and went barreling off into the woods after the glimmerfly. Anin was startled. She scrambled to her feet as Adolf bolted away and disappeared into the trees. For a while she tried to follow him, but it was no use. In a few moments she had lost Adolf completely. Worse still, she realized now that she had also lost herself. Like most everyone she knew, Anin had grown up in the forest, and she had an instinctual sense of direction. She took a deep breath, calming down the frustration and anxiety which was beginning to well up inside her. She didn't know this part of the woods, but she was confident she could manage to find her way back. Adolf would just have to look out for himself. Anin began picking her way carefully back through the gloom. It wasn't very long before she left the dark part of the forest behind her and came to a place where there was a bit more sunlight. Beneath the rays of light, the foliage glowed with a warm green glow, and Anin was sure she was on the right track. Then suddenly, she stopped and froze in her tracks. Standing in the woods just a few yards ahead of her was a green unicorn, the horned horse. It was a moderately sized creature, about half the size of an ordinary horse. But its body was lean and muscled like a leopard, and its fur was a deep sea green color with black spots, and red-brown hair on its mane and fetlocks. At the center of its head was a single, slightly curved horn. The green unicorn wasn't a true unicorn, but was rather a slightly arcane species of common unicorn or horned horses. And unlike a unicorn, a green unicorn could not be tamed by elf maidens. They just ate them. For the green unicorn was a fearsome carnivore with an appetite for all things magical. It may well have been stalking the glimmerfly, or equally likely, it may have instead been stalking her. The creature hesitated, apparently sizing Anin up for himself to see how dangerous a prey she might be. Anin thought fast. Frantically she cast about herself for something, anything. There, just to one side of her, was a tree with some thick lower branches. She had no idea if she could climb it or not, but it was the best chance she had. Gingerly she began to edge herself towards the tree, not daring to take her eyes off the unicorn. But the unicorn had had enough. In a flash, the creature gathered up its legs under it and bounded in her direction with a terrible, snarling whinny. Anin bolted for the tree with an unbidden strength, and she hurled herself up onto the nearest branch as the unicorn snapped at her heels. For the moment she was safe. She had made it high enough that the creature couldn't quite reach her, and as she hugged her legs close to her body, just out of reach of its jaws, the unicorn let forth an enraged, howling neigh. And then it jumped. The unicorn leapt up on its hind legs and bounded into the air, snapping its jaws at her legs a couple of times before landing again. And it kept on jumping and kept on snapping. Anin was barely holding on to the branch. Her muscles were beginning to quiver, and it felt like they would give out any moment, and she would fall to the ground and be torn to pieces by the ravenous beast. Then, from out of the forest, there came a silvery bark. Bounding through the trees was Silversides the dog, barking madly as she streamed through the brush like a silver bolt of lightning. She caught the unicorn just as it was beginning to leap again, and the predator nearly tumbled over itself as the dog came unexpectedly, snapping at its haunches. Then a terrible dance began. The two animals began circling one another, the unicorn snarling and slavering with eldritch fury, while the dog did her best to stay just out of reach, barking frantically every moment. Then suddenly, like a second bolt of lightning, a long, straight wooden shaft shot out from the trees. With a strangled howl, the unicorn staggered and swayed and then collapsed to the ground, with Gellen's spear embedded at the base of its neck. Gelen himself then stepped into view, his terrible wood knife brandished in his hand. He strode over to where the unicorn still lay twitching on the ground, and with one swift motion he drew the blade clear through the animal's throat, and the unicorn at last went limp. Anin felt her arms relax, and she was about to let go at last when Gelen sped to the tree, and before she knew what was happening, he caught her up in his arms and deposited her on the ground. For a moment the two of them stood there, saying nothing. Gelen's hands were still holding onto her hips, and Anin felt a wave of relief and comfort watch over her as she looked into the man's eyes. They were a beautiful, bright violet color, which was rather unusual among the elves of Essenet, and she marveled to herself that she had never quite looked the man in the eye before to have noticed them. Or perhaps it had instead been he who had never quite looked her in the eye. Starsides had now padded over, whimpering slightly and sniffing at their legs, as if to inquire whether everyone was all right. Gillen released his grip on Anin's body, and then he looked away. As he did so, it suddenly occurred to her that for all his brooding aloofness, Gillen might in fact be a very shy sort of elf. "I'm very sorry," Gillen said, stammering slightly. "I should never have left you alone. I hope you're not hurt. This is all my fault." Anin didn't know what to say. She just felt relieved and grateful. She also felt that all this time she may have been overlooking something which was really very special. And so she instead acted on what she felt, and putting her arms around him, she pressed her body against his. Galen had always been a kind person, even when he seemed cold. But as he quietly returned the embrace, she thought to herself that he really wasn't cold at all. Not in the slightest bit. It was some time later, and Anin and Gelen were walking back down the forest road hand in hand, with Starside padding along merrily behind. They were talking and laughing together, and had been doing so for hours. They were nearly at the turn which led back to the bell tower when they at last ran into Aetolf. Aetolf was cheerful and in good spirits, though looking slightly the worse for wear, and dangling on the end of a cord tied to his belt was a dead glimmerfly. "Why, hello, Anin," Aetolf said. "Wherever did you get off to? You missed the whole chase, and mark my words, it was truly a chase. But it's all right. I got the glimmerfly after all. It's a pity you weren't there to see me catch it in the end." Anin smiled. "That's very nice, Aetol," she replied. "But Galen and I were just on our way to take a swim down at the stream. I'm going to show him how to catch crayfish." And that's it. I hope that didn't run too long.
No, you did not. I mean, we normally aim for an hour, but it does not. It's okay if we go over.
Yeah.
So let's. As you could see, though, I got inundated by cats who were just lured here, I guess. One, then the next one, and so no, thank you so much, and that was really great. We have a few questions from the audience, if you have time and are willing to answer them. Yes. Okay. So, one of the first questions was, how long have you been writing?
It depends on how you measure it. I've been world building, if you will, for probably 20 years, but it's been, off and on, jotting down notes and so on. I started my first serious writing, 10 years ago. It was my first book, and it was also probably one of my more ambitious projects, and it still isn't finished. I finished my first book, I want to say, 7 years ago now. And my second book I finished in the summer of 2018. And then I've been writing stories ever since. And
I'm so sorry.
It's quite all right.
Hi, guys. Okay, go do cat things elsewhere now. Okay. I guess they wanted to fight over who got to sit in the middle and listen. Like, what's happening? Okay, so, well, fairly recently then on your second book. So, and I guess overall, if your first one was only 7 years ago, that's not that long. So let's see here. What is one of the most surprising things you learned while writing?
Surprising. I'd say one of the things that really caught me off guard is that I tended to be excessively thorough, especially when I started out writing. And one of the things that really caught me once I started writing was the fact that um, this probably comes as no surprise to anyone who has been formally educated in writing, which I'm afraid I really haven't. Uh, what you don't say is just as important as what you do say. And there is so much more that you can get away with just by not being specific.
Inferring without being too detailed and letting the reader kind of take it away.
Now, for example, I once got bogged down in writing trying to determine the actual geographic range of a dragon by comparing it to the hunting range of a golden eagle. And I sat there running numbers and calculations, and I realized, just don't be specific. Just don't, just don't, you don't need to be that specific. Just say it has a range that is, goes from one village to another. You don't have to give it in miles.
That's true, especially not in a land and world of your own design. Another question was it difficult to find an illustrator who could translate your world vision? So, like, what's here into...
Yes and no. Wasn't that difficult because I did all the drawing myself. But
That's cool.
I'm not a trained artist, so I had to design my art style around my own capabilities. So I was like, okay, I can do simple things, so let's build an art style that's simple.
So I'm going to pull up really quick here. Now, this is your web page.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of the images that are here are also duplicated on your Patreon. So you have made all of this sigils and symbolism that we see here. Is that correct?
That is correct, yeah.
And what's your inspiration for that? Where do you get these ideas from? What is their meaning?
I've always been a member of the Tolkien cult, and I was always inspired by the way he drew his own maps and drew his own material. And even today, you see his works being published with art style that's based on his own drawing style. And I was always like, I like that. I like the style, and I can also almost approximate something like that. So that is the primary style. Now, I also kind of adopted a crescent moon as my icon. It honestly came from a drawing that I did when I was a teenager of a mountain with a castle on its flank and a big crescent moon in the sky. And it just kind of just came to me, and I kind of drew it, and I was like, this is a place. There's something interesting happening here. And I kind of adopted it as my own little sigil for many years. And when I started getting serious about writing, I was like, well, I'll use that.
There it is.
Now,
and so, yes, go ahead.
Yeah, now it is a place in my world, and you'll visit it at some point. But it was originally just kind of, I'll just adopt my own sigil there and then work it in.
So another question that we had was, how do you balance work, life, and writing?
Awkwardly.
Good answer.
For a while, I was in a job that was, I was kind of underutilized, and I had extra time on my hands, and so I could, maybe write when there wasn't anything going on. Then I got into a better position from there that didn't really give me that much opportunity to write. And eventually I was in a place where I was having to change jobs just for external reasons, and I decided to take a gap year. I'd never taken one before. I was just, straight from college to grad school to so on and so forth. And I thought, you know what? I've never done this before. I've got several unfinished books, and I thought, let's take a gap year and finish a book. So I was very fortunate in that I could spend an entire year just writing. That was it spoiled me. I'll be honest. It was like, oh, I want to do this forever. Um, and then from there, I've gotten fairly good at writing on weekends and whenever I have spare moment. I'm at the point where I have a notepad with me 24/7. Uh, if I have something with which I can write down ideas or whatever,
Mhm.
I always have access with it. And of course, with the current situation, I've been able to dedicate even more time to it. So,
So I have a question that's a me question.
mhm.
This green unical, is that what you were calling it,
Unical,
or were you saying
yeah,
unicorn?
UNICAL.
Yeah, okay. That's what I thought. At first I thought you were saying unicorn, and I thought, I don't think he's saying unicorn. So is this creature that you have based on some sort of folklore that you have read or found in your studies?
Actually, no. There was. It's got a funny etymology for it. There was a cartoon that I watched as a kid, and it was one of those things that we had it taped on VHS, and you watched it over and over again because that's what kids do. And at one point, just offhand, they mentioned a unicorn,
Okay.
and I, for years and years, misheard it as unical. And
Unicorn.
for many, many years, I thought this was an actual creature. Ah, it's a unicorn. It's like a unicorn, but a different animal. And then eventually I realized, no, the guy just said unicorn, and I was like, well, I've had this word in my vocabulary for no good reason for all this time. I might as well just use it. It's been a part of my uh, little world in my head, if you will. I also I liked the idea of a unicorn as a magical creature. But I also liked the idea of maybe a unicorn is not something that's particularly magical at all. It's just a wild horse that has a horn. And I thought, which do I want to do? Do I want to do, the magic fairy unicorn or something that's maybe a little bit more down to earth or even more sinister? And I thought, let's have it both ways. And I
Right?
just created two different terms. And then I naturally went overboard and started developing the genus. Okay, this is the Latin name for this animal, and this is how it's related to this one. This is under the genus Artio equus. That is a horse that has a cloven hoof, and I just made all stuff up because I do that.
Well, I mean,
Uh,
equus is the Latin word for horse, so
yeah.
it's not totally made up. So, can we just really quick before I let you go, can we just take a look at this? I guess the Wattpad, is that it?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna pull it up here really quick on the screen, and I am unfamiliar with what this is, and that's kind of why I want to take a look at it, because if I'm unfamiliar, surely I'm not the only person in the whole wide world that is also unfamiliar. Maybe there's somebody else out there, but you have a bunch of your writing here, as I'm understanding it. And so, what is this? What is this? What is Wattpad?
My interpretation of Wattpad is that they're essentially YouTube for writing. It's a platform for writers to share their work, to publish it, and to uh, gain readers without having to have people come find them. So for me, I have a website that has all my work on it, but how do I get people to find me? So Wattpad is one platform that I have used thus far to allow people to locate me and potentially read more conveniently. My own website is I built it myself, and I'm not a web developer, and I myself felt it was a little bit slow at times, and publishing on it is a little bit cumbersome. Whereas using Wattpad is actually very streamlined and very quick to load and very easy to publish on. So this is part of my diversification, if you will. But Gate Marshal, which is what I read to you before, right now is exclusively on Wattpad. I have a link to it on my website, but it's only on Wattpad at the moment.
Okay. Yeah, no, I mean, I'm looking at it as you're talking and just kind of cruising through this because I've never really seen this platform. And I actually really love to learn about
Yeah.
new platforms that other artists use,
Mhm.
things I've never seen or whatever, and kind of get the word out about those things. because other people may find it useful if they are aspiring, or if they are looking for, so I guess I'm thinking that if people follow you
Mhm.
specifically on this, that like if like here where it says read, this I guess would take me to read your thing, but like if I put a plus here,
Mhm.
this will inform me, for example, every
Mhm.
time you update it or add another chapter in a serial thing, correct? Am I understanding that right?
The short answer is I'm not entirely sure because I'm fairly new to the platform myself. For a while, I was publishing on a platform called Royal Road, which is
Yes.
uh, it was okay, but I felt discoverability was kind of bad on that platform.
Yeah.
I think maybe hopefully they've improved a bit over time, but this transition for me was part of diversifying. Eventually, I hope to get myself on Kindle and get something that's
Yeah.
actually a hard copy. But in today's world, a lot of people um, expect to get content for free, and which it works. You have things like Patreon. It's a brilliant system. I support a lot of artists on Patreon because I consume their work and I really value it, and I want them to keep going, and I want to contribute. And it's $1 a month. That's not that much for me.
Right.
Um, and I feel that just offering my work for free will help bring people in. People will be willing to, oh, well, this doesn't cost me anything. I might as well read it. So I figured, you know, just get myself out there and don't be afraid to let people read my stuff at no charge. And that way they can discover me and decide whether or not they like me.
Yeah, no, it's definitely, 20 years ago, that was not really how either I think the public worked or marketing worked, but we are not in that world anymore. And there are just put it out there, and then allowing people to, give what they think is a really quite a popular and successful platform for a lot of artists. So, well, thank you so much for joining us today and for reading both of those excerpts. They were really great, and you did a fantastic job reading, even on the one that you didn't practice on. You still did quite good. And do you have anything else that you would like to say before we bid you good afternoon?
Well, I would like to thank you for having me on here. I think you've got a great program going.
Thank you.
I've watched some of
Thank
your
you.
streams before, and I've really enjoyed it. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to be here.
This is one of the new things that sort of sprouted up for us over here,
Yeah.
as a result of the COVID, and I really have been enjoying it. I intend to continue doing this after the whole
Mhm.
all of the craziness is
Yeah.
done. I really enjoy it. So thank you. I'm glad you enjoy it too. And it was great having you on. And so for anybody watching at home, all of Jack's work are on the websites. You can support him by subscribing to his Patreon as well. I saw that $100 thing on your Patreon where you'll write a story. And I thought, hmm. I thought, that could be interesting. So, uh, but there are regular levels as well, so you do not have to subscribe at $100. My eyeballs popped at that one, and I was like, ooh, I want a story with the peoples that I know. That sounds great. So,
Well, you can
yes.
always just subscribe once and then change your subscription afterwards. It's weird that Patreon doesn't have a one-time donation option.
I know. Being on Patreon myself, I do have a lot of people actually ask me if they can just do a one-time subscription,
Mhm.
and well, no,
Yeah.
because it's but to be perfectly honest, I kind of would sometimes, because people will want to, if they can't do a one-time thing, they'll maybe say, well, I'll send you $5 or $10 in PayPal, and I just say no, because ultimately I am not really here to be just making, like,
Mhm.
not as if there's huge big bucks to
Yeah.
be making, I guess. But I'm just like, no, 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 like ultimately it's meant to be free. But I would rather have $1 a month
Mhm.
and them to enjoy my content for 5 months at $1 a month than to
Yeah.
send me $5 on
Mhm.
PayPal,
Yeah.
so because they are a part of that content, right? So, yeah. So anyway, that whatever. That's just sort of my thought on that. I do sort of wish they had those because the just like a one-time thing. So kitty again. Anywho, everybody, you can read all of Jack's content for free and then support him on Patreon if you love his work. And the links for that are going and have been going in the ticker bar below, but they are also in the low bar and the description on Facebook and YouTube. So you should be able to expand those and then just click the link and go to the places. And thank you so much for joining us and bringing your really unique style and method of doing this. And it's really great to have you on today.
Thank you.
Yep, absolutely. We will bid you adieu and speak soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
And I have pushed the giant button.